All right, hello everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar. We can go ahead and get started. My name is Jaya, and I'm a program coordinator on the Registry Services team here at the Climate Registry. So first off, I'll start with an introduction to the Climate Registry, and I'll give an introduction to the Water Energy Nexus Registry program as well, before passing it off to our panelists for a great discussion. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please type them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer them at the end of the webinar. So the Climate Registry was founded in 2007 with a mission to empower North American organizations to do more in the fight against climate change. TCR creates and manages tools for the measurement and reporting of GHG emissions and recognizes and showcases excellence in climate leadership. Now, the Water Energy Nexus recognizes that there's a relationship between water and energy. So moving, treating, and using water requires energy. And these sources of energy used to power water activities are associated with the greenhouse gases that we emit into the atmosphere. In CARB's 2022 Climate Change Scoping Plan, they identified some lofty goals specifically tied to greenhouse gas emissions. And in this plan, the water sector is identified as a key partner in achieving these statewide goals. So TCR developed the Water Energy Nexus Registry, or the WEN Registry for short, in order to give participants the tools that they need to track the relationship between water use and GHG emissions. Now, the WEN Registry is currently sponsored by the California Environmental Protection Agency, so it's available to organizations with operations in California at no cost through March of 2025. So participants have access to WEN protocols and guidance. They have access to our third-party verification program and have access to our help desk support and training. But one of the most important benefits is understanding your organization's impact in order to make informed decisions to drive innovation and support more resilient infrastructure. And if you're interested in participating in WEN, please contact us for more information. I'll go ahead and share this contact info afterwards as well. And with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. Our moderator is Chelsea, who's a carbon management consultant at Jacobs, but she's a former employee of TCR and was involved with the WEN registry at its inception. And I'd like to introduce our panelists, Carolyn, Maria, and Joe, who are all active participants in the WEN registry. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and I will pass it over to you, Chelsea.
Thanks so much, Jaya, and thank you for the Climate Registry for organizing this webinar. I'm looking forward to having a discussion with some of my old friends from the WEN registry. And as Jaya mentioned, I'm now at Jacobs, which is a global consulting firm. I work in the carbon management space, and we support organizations really across all sectors and sizes in understanding their greenhouse gas emissions, setting a baseline emissions year, and tracking their progress towards GHG reduction targets over time. So we're really happy to be partnering with the Climate Registry to get the word out about the Water Energy Nexus Registry, encourage organizations across California to participate, and supporting those who do in understanding their footprints. And looking forward to our conversation today with a few water agencies throughout California. We've got representation from all the way from the south to the north. And I think I can start by giving each of you a chance to introduce yourself and your organization. So maybe let's just start out with hearing from each of you a little bit about the types of operations at your water agency and your past engagement with the Water Energy Nexus Registry, and maybe even a little bit into the motivation for why it is that you participate in these types of programs. So let's maybe start with the most southern representative with Helix Water District, if you want to kick us off, Joe.
Sure thing, and good morning, everybody. My name is Joe Garuba. I work for Helix Water District. So we're a potable water district. So all we serve is potable water in San Diego County. We're the second largest water agency in the region, and we provide drinking water for approximately 500,000 people a day. We've been a member of the Climate Registry for the last 6 years, and we just got done with our most recent GHG certifications. We did 2020 and then 2022, and so we just wrapped that up. And it's been really, really beneficial for us, not only helping to tell the story on the improvements that we made and figuring out what our operations look like, but then also building support for where we want to go in the future. So the relationship has been nothing but positive between our district and WEN and the Climate Registry. And although we're not a huge agency by municipal standards, we are a larger water agency. And so we sort of see this, we see the need to account for our climate emissions, our GHG emissions, as being consistent with our stewards of public resources. So with that, I'll kick it over to Maria.
Thanks, Joe, and hi, everyone. So I'm Maria Sison-Roces. I'm the Manager of Corporate Sustainability Programs at the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, or LADWP. First, I also, like Joe, wanted to thank TCR for hosting this webinar. It's so important, right? It's really about having these conversations and raising awareness about tools such as TCR and WEN, so that companies can learn about it, participate, and get the benefits. I'm actually remembering our early days reporting when I see Chelsea, and I know that it was really helpful for us to join these calls. So really happy to be here, and thanks for having us here today, Jai and Crystal. For those who may not be as familiar, so LADWP is the largest municipal utility in the country, third largest utility in California, and we provide both energy and water to LA's over 4 million residents and businesses. Our mission, of course, is to do this safely, reliably, affordably, sustainably. We have a very deep focus on transparency and equity, especially for the underserved communities who already bear the brunt of pollution and climate change. In terms of the overall goals, it's about decarbonization, electrification, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and providing sustainable water to Los Angeles. In terms of drivers, we all have the regulatory drivers. And for us in LA, we have LA's Green New Deal, which is our North Star, the very ambitious 5-0 goals of zero carbon grid, zero carbon transportation, zero carbon buildings, zero waste, and zero wasted water. But at the end of the day, you know, it's really what our customers want, and you know, they want to have clean air, less pollution, healthier communities. They want us to wean away from fossil fuels and make sure that those electrons that we all get are cleaner and come from more solar and wind and new technologies such as green hydrogen. So same thing on the business side. They want this clean energy transition to happen as businesses set their own goals and set their own net zero emission standards. So just kind of, if I can, just to zoom out a little bit, it's our corporate sustainability team that handles the reporting for TCR and WEN and also CDP. We work very closely with our environmental folks who handle the CARB mandatory reporting, AB 32, and also with our water engineers who constantly track emissions for various LADWP water supplies. So there's a lot of collaboration across LADWP to ensure consistency of data, which is key, right? And then also we started reporting, LADWP started reporting to TCR and WEN since 2018 with a co-founding role. And by the way, a long time ago in 2002, LADWP was also a co-founder of CCAR, which sunsetted in 2008 around the same time as CARB's mandatory GHG emissions reporting started up. And then I just wanted to mention too that DWP's internal GHG emissions inventory, which is done by our environmental team, is mostly a continuation of what was started under CCAR, with some updates to reflect the GHG emissions reporting to CARB. So I'll pause right there.
Thanks, Maria. And I appreciate your introduction as well, Joe. I think I got frozen. My internet went out a little bit, but appreciate you continuing without me, Maria. And Carolyn, let's hear from you next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carolyn Greco. I work for Sonoma Water. We are a wholesale water supplier in Northern California. We sell water to about 600,000 residents in Sonoma and Marin counties. We also offer some sanitation services as well as flood protection services as well. I work in the Energy Resources Group, which is a subsection of the engineering division at Sonoma Water. I have been reporting to the Climate Registry since 2016, and I operate under our comprehensive energy policy and our carbon-free water program. And we'll kind of get into the weeds of that later into this conversation, but similar to Maria, we also were at the inception of the WEN registry when it first started. I was on the technical advisory committee to help develop the tool, and we still use it, and it's been supremely helpful to the water agency that I work for. We utilize the data for more than just the greenhouse gas inventory. And yeah, I'm excited to be here today to kind of shed some light on it and how it's been helpful for us.
Wonderful. Thank you all. So folks, we have a great representation here of organizations who really participate in all elements of California's water supply chain. We've got potable water delivery and treatment. We've got some energy production from LADWP, some sanitation services, flood protection, and so on. And we've also got representation all the way from San Diego up to Northern California. So certainly encourage you to get your questions in today. You can do so throughout the webinar. I will be monitoring that Q&A box, and we'll ask those questions as we go. So you don't need to save them for the end, although we will also leave time at the end for a more formal Q&A period. So feel free to get those in, and we will get your questions asked. And otherwise, as we just heard in the introduction, we know from the water resources sector that folks need to be focused on resilience and adaptation and being stewards of a really somewhat finite resource in their operations in general. And that's generally how water agencies approach their engagement with climate change, is preparing for those changes and responding to and adapting to those future needs. But certainly there's this other piece of the puzzle, which is related to sustainability and managing their own impact on the environment as well. And the Water Energy Nexus Registry and the Climate Registry's broader programs provides opportunity for understanding that impact and then telling a story as you begin to deliver initiatives that then manage those emissions as well. And as Jaya mentioned at the beginning, the state of California's scoping plan has a very ambitious set of targets for moving its entire economy to net zero. Also for rolling out legislation that will encourage organizations throughout California to report their organization's greenhouse gas emissions. So this voluntary program provides a wonderful starting place for preparing for potential legislation if your organization is under contract or under obligation to meet those future requirements, but also provides an opportunity for you to deliver on those sustainability initiatives beyond just resiliency and adaptation. So with that in mind, I'd like to start by asking each of you in the group about exactly what Carolyn was mentioning at the end of her introduction, what it is that you have used your Water Energy Nexus Registry data for at your organization. So within the registry, we have a suite of protocols for guiding organizations through the process for measuring their emissions from the Water Energy Nexus, and then also guidance for how it is that you should report those emissions credibly. But beyond just telling that emissions story to the public and sharing that information transparently, how it is that information has benefited your organization and what it's been used for. And maybe we'll go back around the circle and start off with you, Carolyn, this time, and go from north to south.
Yeah, sure. So prior to the WEN registry, actually, utilizing that greenhouse gas data that we had put together for just regular reporting, we put together a report that we called the Power Content Report. And every year we would take a look at individual facilities, how much energy they were using, how much water they were processing, and those type of data points of the like. And it really helped us hone in on which projects made sense at different facilities. For example, at our Sonoma Valley treatment plant, we had a large amount of energy that we were using, and it made sense for us to put solar at that site. And had we not reported our greenhouse gas inventory, taken a look into more details on how much energy that was actually consuming, maybe we wouldn't have done that project, which has been cost effective for us. This was years ago. Now we're actually looking at replacing it. I want to say it was almost 20 years ago. But in any case, not only are we looking at individual facilities, but we were able to recognize the correlation between water use, energy use, and greenhouse gas emissions. And obviously, seeing that correlation, all three together over time, has painted a really nice picture for us to communicate to our constituents, communicate to our board. And ultimately, that led to our energy policy, where we decided we wanted to procure local, renewable, non-fossil fuel-based power. And that's been a long road now. And in 2015, we actually achieved the goal of having a fully non-fossil fuel-based energy purchases for all of our facilities. And it's been very successful. And we've gone down, from a market-based standpoint, we've gone down by about 90% in our overall carbon footprint. So we're really proud of that, and publicly reporting it as well, giving that transparency is huge as a public entity. And like Chelsea said, staying ahead of the curve in terms of legislative requirements that may come into place is also a big plus for us as a public agency as well.
Wonderful, and congratulations on that. Those wonderful initiatives. It's a great story to tell, and I think there's been a lot of wonderful materials shared about that carbon-free water. And it's great that the Water Energy Nexus Registry's data has been able to credibly support that communications campaign as well.
Absolutely.
Maria, how about for you?
Yeah, so for LADWP, it's really interesting that the whole greenhouse gas emissions inventory, which is done by our very smart folks in the environmental team. To me, it was interesting when I found out that it was a continuation of what was started under CCAR, right? So again, there's that TCR connection to begin with. And then we've got our power system, of course, that has their strategic plan, the strategic long-term resource plan, which is their strategic plan for the LA 100. And then we've got our water system that has their urban water management plan, which they're required to produce every 5 years by the state. And it's the planning for resources for multiple years on where the water is coming from. And I wanted to also just share a little bit of backstory on how the sustainability group got involved with TCR and WEN. It was, the backstory of it is that in 2018, it was our then Chief Sustainability Officer, Nancy Sutley, who's now the Deputy Mayor for Mayor Bass. She encouraged us to pursue the reporting to both TCR and WEN. Again, it just made practical sense because of the history with CCAR, and also we provide both energy and water to LA, and so the WEN connection is obvious. And then, of course, the engagement with other water agencies who are also members is a driver. I will share that when we first got the assignment, for us, we weren't really sure how to go about it. But I remember we were excited about the opportunity, and we were already doing voluntary reporting to CDP. And then we joined the webcasts that Chelsea and TCR hosted. We were just eager to learn more. And we even had in-person meetings with TCR at the time. Yeah, I remember those in-person meetings. And then we became more familiar with emissions reporting. It gave us a better understanding of how important and relevant this work is. An added benefit for us is that we got to work closely and collaborate with our own internal subject matter experts in the environmental group and the water system to make sure that our data is consistent. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had the opportunity, to work with our colleagues and get a better understanding of GHG emissions, which, by the way, later on, it gave us the confidence to pursue our science-based targets. Just as a side note, right, LADWP's GHG emissions targets were validated by the Science-Based Targets Initiative in July 2022, making us the only municipal utility to have approved science-based targets. But I digress. So for us, TCR and WEN really has been a journey, and our targets do move, and we continue to evolve. In fact, we just hired our lead environmental specialist for this effort, for the TCR and WEN effort, and we just really look forward to the next phase of our journey with TCR and WEN reporting.
Thanks, Maria. Yeah, it sounds like a wonderful progression, and also the data that's been developed through the Water Energy Nexus Registry has contributed to your ability to set credible GHG emissions reduction targets. The Science-Based Targets Initiative certainly is a very ambitious program, and it's wonderful to have a target validated and recognized by them, and I wish you the best of luck in working towards achieving that, and also that it's helped reduce silos within the organization, bringing different groups together from your water and energy space to be able to develop data collaboratively and report on something that is the result of each of your different types of operations, which is greenhouse gas emissions. So that's wonderful to hear. And Joe, let's close it off with you, just a little bit about how it is that your organization uses your Water Energy Nexus Registry data.
Yeah, thank you. So I've been with the district for about 8 years, and when I got here, it was pretty obvious that the district was committed to making smart choices around the equipment it was installing and the way it was operating to minimize energy consumption. They didn't really have a good grasp on how to capture all of that and what those improvements really meant in a real world impact. And so in the 2016-2017 time frame, we went through and did our first 2 years of GHG analysis. And what we were able to do at that point was, and we used some back data. We had 20 years worth of data that we were able to draw on. So we went back to 2009 and used that as our baseline. And then we were able to use that data to really start to show where the district was, 20 years ago, and then how it had progressed. I think in this conversation, what's really important for us is it's critical to have a plan. And so the climate registry data helps create that plan, because maybe the most important resource we have is ratepayer money, right? And so we can't afford to go out and just try to do everything. We don't have that luxury, especially in the district that we operate. And so making a convincing argument of why we want to spend that precious resource, the ratepayer dollars, on some improvement or on some policy choice to try to reduce carbon emissions, we really need to show what we think that cause and effect is going to be. And so having those two baseline years, we did 2009 and 2013, and then following that up with our 2020 and 22, we've been able to show this fairly significant reduction. We've reduced 40% of our emissions. And maybe more importantly, we've been able to build that support at the policy level and at the director level, board of director level, to fund those projects and improvements that we think are really going to take us to near zero. And so from my perspective, having that plan, having the data, having it validated through the climate registry and when really is compelling for our board and also our ratepayers when we go to them and say, hey, this is what all the data says. This is our plan of attack based on that data. And this is what we think it's going to cost. And we're going to be able to tell you pretty quickly whether or not we've spent your money wisely, right? And so that credibility is critical for us to be successful, not only in this effort, but in kind of all of our efforts across the board.
That's wonderful. I think hearing from each of you that the data has both contributed to internal decision making, but also justification for future plans is wonderful, and certainly knowing and trusting the credibility of the information that's created through the Water Energy Nexus Registry has provided you with a good tool both for communicating with external stakeholders and your decision makers at your organization, which is exactly what we want to hear. And I guess before we move on to the next set of questions, we did get a couple of questions from our audience that I wanted to pass to each of you. I guess I'll start off by answering the first one myself. Somebody's asked whether there's whispers or conversations at this point about potential legislation that would set requirements specific to water agencies for GHG reporting. I guess the ultimate the ultimate response is that I'm not aware specifically, and I will let Jaya weigh in a second on that, but there has been recent legislation passed in California that requires very large businesses doing business in California to report GHG emissions on an annual basis. I believe the threshold is 1 billion annually in revenue or budget. So organizations of that size will be required to report GHG emissions. So if you're a water agency of that size, that will apply to you. Similarly, there is a new requirement as well to report climate-related risks in California. And I think the threshold for that requirement is a little bit smaller, so I think it's a 500 million annual budget or revenue, and these do apply to both public and private organizations, so any type of organization doing business in California. So these are new requirements for GHG reporting and climate risk assessment and reporting that will go into effect in the coming years if everything stays as is, but they have been passed and are intended to be released, and certainly CARB and other regulators in the state are working now to develop the actual program to support the requirements of those legislations. And I guess I'll pause there. Jaya, is there anything that you wanted to add on this?
No, that was spot on, Chelsea.
Okay, great. Wonderful. And so that aside, happy to answer any follow-up questions about that. I have a question for each of you panelists. Somebody's asked whether any of you have actually calculated the carbon savings associated with any water system leakage or physical losses. So addressing those losses and reducing them using the International Water Association Leakage Emissions Initiative published methodology. Anybody familiar with that, or have you done calculations that understand the carbon savings from those addressing those leakages?
We haven't addressed it specifically, which is like to say, hey, we've lost X amount of water and that translates into X amount of GHG emissions. But we do have our GHG emissions per acre foot. And so I know our annual water quality report is starting to kind of nibble around that. Like, what is that going to mean? Our unaccounted for water is pretty minimal. So we're fairly fortunate in that regard, but we would be able to calculate that out pretty quickly.
Great.
I also just pinged our subject matter expert real quickly, and what she said is that, yeah, LADWP does calculate the annual water loss.
Right, and is able to translate that. I think similarly to Joe into potential emissions associated with that water loss as well, because I know that you also have a emissions per acre foot and emissions per kilowatt hour per acre foot metrics that you guys track as well. Great, and so the next question I think is leading into future parts of our discussion, so we can move on for the time being. So the next question we have is if we can talk into a little bit of the challenges that your organization may have faced along the road in its GHG reporting journey. So certainly the starting processes can be a little bit daunting for folks who have not already begun understanding the greenhouse gas emissions, and there's a lot of steps involved into setting a baseline year and getting to the point where you're creating credible data like the three of your organizations are, so that you can use it to make decisions. So interested to hear from each of you, maybe a challenge or two that was faced along the way and solutions that you were able to come up with to circumvent those challenges, and maybe a piece of advice that you might have for folks who are just getting started. Do you want to kick us off this time, Maria?
Sure. So actually, it's really the bigger challenge, right? I think the reporting piece of it is really just making sure that we capture all the data accurately. But just for LA, for the bigger picture, right? Water system primarily uses the energy from our power system, except in areas, of course, that are outside of LA city boundaries. So where they use other energy providers. But for us, as LA's grid gets cleaner, the less emissions it will be for our water system, which is a very good thing, but we're not 100% there yet. So that's the challenge, right? It'll take some time for that clean energy transition. But meanwhile, there's a consistent and constant effort to track the energy and carbon costs associated with producing and delivering water to LA, because at the end of the day, it's about being good stewards of the planet, keeping track of our carbon footprint, and at the same time the affordability factor, keeping rates low for our customers. I'll just mention that it's the whole sort of like climate change thing, right? Being in the West, there's wet years and dry years. Wet year, we have rain, we get to store it. Dry year, no rain, we have to buy more water from the Delta or Sacramento. And now, with the challenge of each year being a record year for climate, there's wetter wets and drier dries. But DWP gets both gets water both from local and imported sources, right? So there's different energy intensities depending on where that water comes from. So if we bring it in from the outside, which we dub our imported sources, it takes energy to pump, deliver, clean that water. And typically there's a higher energy intensity for imported water as compared to local sources. And local is good because it improves our water resilience and ultimately keeps our rates low. I'll just add that most of LA's water comes from the LA aqueduct, which is typically low energy intensity because it's gravity fed, and it's also an energy positive source because it generates electricity, which goes back to the grid, or the hydroelectric source, right? And then, of course, the recycled water piece, which is good because it adds to resilience. We have a very low percentage right now, but it's growing. And then the challenge that it's going to be highly energy intensive because we have to treat the water and clean all the chemicals to ensure it's safe to drink. But the success part of that is that we have Operation Next, which is the initiative to recycle 100% of available treated wastewater for beneficial reuse. So that's very exciting. And we have a lot of very smart engineers in our water system who are thinking deeply about how to expand energy efficiency recycling methods for the water system, which will be key to keeping those costs low. And then, of course, for our programs and incentives, we continue to incent our customers to keep using less water.
Great. Thanks, Maria. Yeah, I think we told a great story of another way that the data from the Water Energy Nexus Registry has been used by the LADWP. Certainly, it's a bit of a challenge for water agencies to tell the story of their emissions reductions over time when they have such different operations from year to year, given the amount of water that they have available to them and where those water sources are coming from, given water availability on an annual basis. So having some of those metrics that normalize emissions to an acre foot of water moved through your system, or a kilowatt hour to the water moved through your systems, sort of levels out some of those extreme peaks so that you can show emissions reductions over time a little bit easier. And it also helps you to understand the impact of a drought year or a water heavy year, where you can see how that impacts your emissions versus the water that you're moving through your system as well. So that's a great way to use your data for water resources planning, and also certainly helps deal with some of the challenges of telling your story for emissions reductions over time. I guess we can maybe head to you next, Carolyn, since I'm looking at you at the just above Maria. Challenges that you faced along the way, and any advice you'd give to somebody who's just getting started on this process?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we first started, we saw we were obviously a large energy user, being that we were treating and delivering a lot of water. We put in different efficiencies throughout our from a water and an energy perspective to make sure that we weren't wasting anything along the way. But at that point, we're still a large energy user. We're managing a lot of water, and you can't really get around that. And from a location-based standpoint, we have not so much power in what we're getting from the grid. A solution that we found to be very cost effective as well was entering into JPAs with different energy entities, including local community choice energies, as well as the Power and Water Resources Pooling Authority, where we buy a majority of our energy from. And through that, we've saved, since we began in 2007, we've saved millions of dollars along the way. And that tells a wonderful story of not only we're saving ratepayer money, kind of like Joe was saying, but also we've reduced our carbon footprint by a lot. And that was very impactful for us. Outside of that, that was like our big one. While you're reporting to the climate registry, you kind of have to collect data throughout the entity. And, there's 300 employees that work, give or take a little, that work for Sonoma Water. And from an education standpoint, making sure that people understand what it is we're doing, why we're doing it from a very even just basic climate science perspective can be a challenge, I think. But outside of that, people are very open in Sonoma County to it. And especially now that we've been doing it for so long, the education across the board has been pretty good. And then outside of our kind of scope 2 emissions and that education piece, our scope 1 emissions, our direct emissions related to our stationary combustion and mobile emissions, that's been a challenge for us. But, we're slowly starting to electrify our fleet along the way. And at this time, we're almost at 20% of our overall fleet has been electrified, which is great. And we hope to see that moving in a positive direction as well, and tracking that through the greenhouse gas inventory. And outside of that, some stationary combustion, we have some standby generators that, we're going to stick around for now. But we are heading in a direction now where we're trying to procure some renewable natural gas. And although we'll still result in some emissions from that, the qualitative perspective of, from a life cycle perspective, it's still coming from a more ethical place than that of fossil fuels. So that's sort of what we're doing now and the challenges that we're facing from a direct emission standpoint.
Wonderful. Yeah. And I think you did a great job of summarizing some of the challenges that you faced in addressing your emissions, and ways that you've come up with solutions that showed some great emissions reductions. Folks in the Q&A have been curious to hear some examples of those ways that each of you have achieved emissions reductions at your organization. So we'll remember that and come back to it in just a second. And beyond that, you mentioned education as well, and certainly that is a big part of this process. You do require a lot of stakeholders to be engaged as you endeavor to report your organization's greenhouse gas emissions. And it's another great benefit of the Water Energy Nexus Registry program. The Climate Registry provides a very hands-on help desk that's available to support you. They have training resources that you can use to provide education to others in your organization, and a lot of guidance documents as well that are written work that you can read through and provide to folks to do on their own reading time. So certainly lots of support available from the Climate Registry to help deal with some of those education challenges as well. Joe, over to you with primary challenges or any advice that you might give to organizations getting started.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that starting is hard, right? Like, especially if you're not under a mandate and you just want to do it because you think it's the right thing to do. Building that sort of organizational acceptance and willingness to do this is tough, and it doesn't happen overnight, and it takes a lot of conversations. It did for us. It took us a while to get everybody kind of motivated and on board with it, because it's risky, right? We didn't know what the answer was going to be. We didn't know if it was going to be good or bad. What happens if the data is going in the wrong direction? As public agencies, we're generically risk adverse. It's sort of like built into our genetic code. And so, you have to overcome that. And it's okay. It's okay in the beginning to say, yeah, this is going to be tough. Give yourself a little bit of grace if it doesn't happen overnight, and just kind of keep plugging away. The data collection can be, especially the first time out, it can be a little bit daunting if you aren't, if you're not aware of what's going to be required. And that's where I think the folks at TCM and WEN are super helpful in that respect. And then I would say the other challenge, but once you get past that and once you build momentum, then I think people start to get enthusiastic, and it builds kind of its own momentum. And then the next time around, it's not nearly as difficult. The other challenge that I think we've seen is being, from an organizational standpoint, willing to move off of a priority because the data says we should go do something different, right? And so, like, our capital plans are 10 years in the making, right? We have a future look ahead. We have like this big program, and if we get data back that says, hey, look, it doesn't make sense to go, to do this improvement because what you thought was going to give you a big benefit really isn't, and instead you should go spend money elsewhere. Sometimes that can cause organizational ripples, right? People have pet projects, or they, for a variety of reasons, there's all kinds of different agendas. And so being willing to go where the data leads, I think, you have to recognize that sometimes that can be a challenge. And that people have investments in their projects that may be beyond of what the GHG improvements are. And so you just have to kind of recognize that and work through that.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point. And I guess it does require a strong champion for the GHG data story as well, to be able to make that point and advocate for it, to be part of the decision-making process when there are so many other vested interests for whatever those motivations may be. Wonderful. So I think we're in our last nearly 10 minutes or so. So the last question folks are interested in hearing about, I already mentioned, is just a quick little summary of some of the carbon reductions that your organization's been able to achieve. I think maybe a little bit more specifics on the technologies that have been implemented. I know we've already heard a little bit from you, Carolyn, about Sonoma's direct emissions that have been addressed, and as well from each of you on how the data has been helpful in understanding the emissions impacts of different water management choices and initiatives to undertake. So a few bulleted points of specific examples of emission reductions initiatives and potential infrastructure or technology improvements that you have done and shown those reductions with. So do you want to kick us off, Carolyn, based on what you started discussing earlier, just to quickly summarize?
Sure. Yeah. Just to kind of quickly summarize what I mentioned earlier, utilizing agreements, joint powers agreements with entities has been extremely helpful for us to reduce our scope 2 emissions. From a scope 1 perspective, we're starting to look at the next steps of how can we heat our office buildings utilizing the renewable natural gas rather than just ordinary natural gas, also just through a similar type of JPA. And it'll also be hopefully cost effective as well, so that it makes sense to our ratepayers as well. Outside of that, trying to replace our fleet vehicles with electric vehicles. And so that's just to kind of summarize what I was saying earlier.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and so within the Water Energy Nexus Registry program, certainly the focus is the Water and Energy Nexus, but there is also the protocol does provide support for measuring emissions from all sources at your organization. So obviously, most water agencies have some element of a vehicle fleet and sources outside of their water system, which can actually prove to be a larger source of emissions, surprisingly. So it certainly that electrification process, when you're coupling that with renewable energy, will provide some great savings as well. And as Carolyn mentioned, those joint power purchase agreements will provide an opportunity as well to address emissions without actually needing to put any infrastructure or technologies on your own land or system as well. Certainly you can do that. That is an opportunity, but it provides a market-based accounting approach for allowing you to purchase into those renewables without actually needed to do that infrastructure investment if that's an opportunity for you as well. Joe, you want to go next with a bulleted list of your emissions reductions initiatives?
Yeah, sure. So besides, we've done some solar improvements and some renewable energy, but when you look out 10 years, there's sort of a natural glide path down to, zero carbon emissions from a renewable portfolio as the state increases its electrification and, the amount of energy we're getting from renewables. So from a policy standpoint, we've talked to our board and said, if you want to move forward faster than what the state's articulating, we can acquire, power on the side, that better portfolio. But if not, then you can just stay consistent and kind of ride their train to, to 100% renewable. What really jumped out for us in our emission analysis was our transportation emissions. And so we did a couple of things. The first is we converted our diesel to a renewable diesel. And that was like fantastic. It's a super easy swap. It's a direct, drop-in replacement. The vehicles perform better. So we've had way better success with our diesel trucks from a maintenance standpoint, because the renewable diesel burns a lot cleaner, and it's just been a fantastic product for us. And that actually took quite a bit of our emissions off the top from a transportation standpoint. The second is with the transition to a fully electrified fleet. That's actually proving to be a bit daunting. And so we're in the middle of designing to completely outfit our operations center with electric vehicle charging stations. And so right now we're about 80% design. We hope to be under construction later this year. At the end, we'll install 83 level 3 chargers that range from 40 kilowatts up to 350 kilowatts in charging capacity for each one. It's a huge undertaking. The project's going to be in excess of $10 million. We've received a fair amount of grant funding for it. And that's really going to, between that and moving our vehicles to electrification and then also the electric base moving to a renewable generation, that really gets us near zero. And so we think we're going to be able to achieve that by late 2030s. We will essentially wipe out our carbon footprint.
Wonderful. That's awesome. And you mentioned that you've been able to secure a lot of grant funding for those initiatives as well. There's certainly a great time for climate action funding. There's the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act. There's a lot of money on the table right now, and a lot of those programs do require some element of understanding your emissions baseline and the potential to reduce emissions with the program that you're proposing in order to secure those funds. So again, the Water Energy Nexus Registry program and the data that comes out of it, if your organization goes through the reporting process, provides exactly the information that you need to secure those types of funds. And will also, those funds will obviously contribute to showing that downward trend in your emissions over time, as Joe was mentioning. Maria, last up, any emissions reductions initiatives that you'd like to share overall?
Yeah, sure. I'm gonna sort of go back to the way we started, in that LADWP, we have the advantage of having the power system and the water system under one organization. So you can just tell that there's a lot of collaboration between and among the two systems, again, for the benefit ultimately of our customers that we serve, right? So I'll give one specific example, that our water system participates in Power Systems Demand Response Program. So think about those pumping stations and things like that can almost act like batteries for us when it's peak demand, temperatures are high, and our power system calls for a demand response to all our customers. They can depend on our water system to do that, right? So that's just a specific example. But I think overall, it's that both systems are, and all the 11,000 employees of LADWP are really rowing in the same direction with the overall goals of decarbonization. The power system, we've got the LA 100, which is the ambition to reach 100% clean energy by 2035. And then for our water system, of course, it's achieving more local water supplies, which in the end will add to LA's resilience and will also keep costs low for LA.
Yeah, that's great. I know we're in our last 5 minutes now, so I want to make sure to get as many questions as we can answered from the Q&A box. I will be tossing these out, and I don't know if we'll go through each and every one of you to get a response. So feel free to chime in if you have something that you'd like to provide in response to the question. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next one. So first question is for each of you, if you have an example or anecdote you'd like to share, how do you partner with the cities in your jurisdiction, or how would you recommend partnering with those cities or encouraging cities to plug into this effort? Is there partnerships that need to be done in order to report the data, or are you providing it to them for their decision-making and planning efforts? Any examples or stories to share there?
I'll say we work really closely with the agencies we serve. So they have to have in their general plan, they have to have a climate action plan, and it accounts for GHG emissions. And so our consultant generally is the same consultant that they use from a GHG emission standpoint. So they're able to take all of our data and just roll it up and break it apart into each jurisdiction that we provide service with. So, we cover 5 different municipalities. And so we're able to sort of slice and dice the information in a variety of ways. And it's a great partnership. They have questions about us. They ask us about what our long range plans are. They're able to take some credit for some of the improvements that we make and count those too for them. And so that's helpful. That gives them a little bit of a, running start. And so, yeah, it's really easy to, integrate and have those conversations with them. So very positive.
Great. Carolyn and Maria, anything you'd like to add, or next one?
I think yeah, just for LADWP, there's a lot of partnerships, not just with the cities, but also the other water agencies as well, that you know, it's going to take collaborative effort from everyone, right? From all the agencies, all the industries combined to reach the goals.
Great. And I think folks are interested in understanding a little bit better too, who exactly it is that your organization completes the reporting process. Certainly it's a little bit rare for water agencies to have a specific sustainability department or folks who are geared specifically towards GHG emissions reporting. Maybe an energy team is a little bit more common or something along those lines. So maybe if you could each share who it is that your organization is the data collector and GHG reporter, and their titles and those types of things, that would be helpful for people. Joe, you want to start again?
Sure. Yeah, so I kind of spearhead it. So I'm in the facilities, I'm the facility manager. So we oversee all the built infrastructure plus the fleet. So it's kind of helpful because everything, like all the buildings and then all the fleet are in my group. So that's relatively easy. But we work really closely with our systems group. And so they have historically captured all of the energy data. So we have every electric bill going back 25 years. And then we upload that. And so it's pretty easy to get all of that information. And then we work with the departments as needed. It's interesting. I mean, there's some things that you wouldn't think about that would create emissions, but like we use gas to freeze the water pipes, right? And so when we're doing service disconnects and we create ice plugs, we have like freeze bags. Well, that's an emission. That gas is an emission, and so we have to work with our warehouse, like how much did we order and stuff like that. So, you know, those little things, like once you go through it the first time, then you're able to kind of figure it out, and then it's easier to chase out the second time.
Maria, how about at your organization, who leads the GHG reporting?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So we've got the folks from our water resource management system that do the you know, the deep work and deep thinking on and the data collection for the various water sources. I will also point out that we've got the urban water management plan, which is available to everyone, right? Which would have the, you know, the carbon intensity of each of the water sources of LA. And yeah, I mean, you know, please reach out to us too within the sustainability team. We're happy to help in any way that we can. And I know it's been the same great relationship that we've had with TCR. So yeah, we're also available to help.
Great. Carolyn, I'll give you the last minute here.
All right, great. Yeah, this was something I wanted to mention earlier and I had overlooked it, but so I am the one who collects all the data and does the reporting with the climate registry, and the climate registry is awesome to work with, very responsive with their email help desk and phone help desk if we ever do run into any problems. But you know, originally when we were reporting our greenhouse gas inventory, we rolled out an RFP or an RFQ, and we did hire that out in the first year or two. Once we figured out how that data was collected, from whom we needed it, and all of those sort of were streamlined, and we realized it did make sense to do that internally, especially since we had created that energy policy and carbon-free water program. We were starting to you know, realize the importance of it, and that this was going to be saving ratepayer dollars. So once we had that almost just template basically that they created for us, we've been doing it ever since, and it's been very streamlined.
Wonderful. So I know we're about a minute over now. Appreciate all the folks who have stayed on the line to the end here, and very much appreciate all of my panelists for joining, and you, Jaya, for hosting the webinar. I believe that the recording will be sent out afterwards, and wonderful to hear from each of you about your participation. Thank you for that, and for the wonderful initiatives that you have in addressing your greenhouse gas emissions. So thanks a lot for joining us, and I hope everybody has a wonderful day.
Yep, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you to our speakers, Carolyn, Joe, Maria, and Chelsea, for an excellent webinar. And like Chelsea mentioned, we'll be sending out the recording as well. All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye.